This podcast ponders how we will live in this COVID era.
What's on the horizon?
What should we expect?
Where are the opportunities? We explore the what's next in the next normal.
Taylor, president of Challenge Factory.
The reason every decision we go to make is so difficult is because it's laden with moral hazard. We can't actually judge what's good and bad.
Dave Hardy, president of Hardy Stevenson and Associates.
COVID has really pushed us to think about what healthy cities mean.
Sarah Thorne, president and CEO at Decision Partners.
We've really acknowledged the recognition and the safety and the caring for each other because we've adopted these new behaviors.
Ujwal Arkalgud, chief anthropologist and CEO at MotivBase.
And this is not just because of the pandemic, this is because a lot of us have gained new knowledge.
Welcome back. I'm Erin Trafford.
I'm Dave Trafford.
So we had a really interesting conversation in the last episode about technology, about innovation, about fostering creativity. And I don't know about you, but I feel like it went to a place I didn't expect it. We ended up having this really great conversation about what it means to foster creativity and imagination in upcoming generations. And so today we're going to take that and really look at the concept of the social contract. Whose responsibility is it going to be to build a better normal?
And that's an important part of it. I mean, this is the whole idea of this is to build, we want the next normal to be a better normal. I mean, Dave Hardy has said that on a couple of occasions, and certainly, all of our hosts are looking at this as an opportunity to look at what are the opportunities as we move forward. What are the lessons learned out of COVID and the pandemic and our experience shared? So yes, in the rearview mirror, all of this is still very cloudy and it's difficult. And we're there, quite frankly, not to put, be rose-colored glasses on it. Some people are going to have a hard time for a number of years. But the point of this conversation is to say, how are we going to make this world better? Not only for those who are suffering now, but to make sure that people don't encounter that kind of suffering when, and this is going to happen again, it happens again, right? So the question of leadership, I think, is really important. And I wonder whether or not the leaders pre-pandemic are going to be the same leaders who are equipped to help and lead us and provide us with vision post-pandemic. Because I don't think the same skills come into play.
And I think that's what our hosts get into in today's conversation, is that fundamentally what it means to lead has a new meaning now. And as a result of that, if we want to really tie this all together, that means that we are going to be looking to people with different characteristics who have developed new skills, who are taking new perspectives, who are challenging the status quo and taking risks in new ways. So we're going to be led off in this conversation by Ujwal Arkalgud, and he gets into it by talking about the changing nature of specifically the American social contract and what we can learn from that and how it really kind of sheds light on where things might be going in terms of our expectations of leadership.
In the last 12 months, we've been invited by more than 45 large corporations in the United States to come and talk about the changing nature of the American social contract. And one of the reasons why these leaders, C-suite, senior leaders, are calling us to have this conversation is because they're asking questions that traditionally have just never been asked. And one of the outcomes of this conversation is this discovery that more and more Americans are understanding of and, in fact, using the term the American caste system to describe some of the challenges they experience or some of the challenges that their peers, their friends, their family members experience in the workforce. And I wanted to set the tone by just explaining what the American caste system really means, not from an academic standpoint, but really means to people, to the average American that's learning about this and talking about this. It's really about the ability for all types of workers to have the forum to advocate for themselves, to have the same privileges that others might have, to be able to stand up, raise their hands and say, no, I will not do this, or no, I need better, or here's what I need in order to do my job better. And there's an increased recognition of the fact that there's a huge divide in the sense that there's only a small portion of the worker population of the economy that has that privilege. The rest don't. And that extends to all kinds of privileges, whether it's healthcare, pension, paid time off, a safe work environment, being not characterized or stratified based on your ethnicity or your background or your accent or whatever else it might be. So that's what I wanted to set the tone with. But again, this is a positive shift because these questions are being asked, and that tells us that this is headed in the right direction.
Yeah, I guess, Lisa, when we look at this from your lens in terms of the future of work, we're talking about essentially the ability or an environment that allows for fairly unvarnished conversations without offense.
Yes, and there's models, it all really comes down to trust. Everything at the end of the day comes down to, can we trust the people that are around us to be able to have those conversations? Can we trust that they're going to understand our point of view? And if we have trust, then we can get to tougher questions that lead to conflict. We can demand the debate. We can start to have some of those harder conversations. But at the beginning, it all starts with trust. And this section started by talking about, you posed a question about the social contract and social responsibility and relationships between employer and employee. I think that there's been a lot that's happened over the last number of years where trust has become a little shaky between those parties. And I think solutions that try to jump into how do we solve for X, how do we engage our employees? Engagement surveys are done, widespread. Really at the foundation of it is, do they trust us? And there's a foundational relationship piece there that really needs to be examined, and then take a look at what are all of the employment structures that we have in place? Are they still up to date? Are they necessary? Who's being left behind? But at the end of the day, if you don't trust who you're working with and who you're working for, these hard conversations will never happen.
Yeah, Dave, I think one of the things that you had brought up at the end of our last episode was when you were onboarding new staff members, telling them, I'm going to require you to take risk, but I'm not going to blame you if you fall down, that in fact, I'm going to help you get back up. That trust factor, catch me when I fall, is sort of critical at all levels of leadership. And you don't have to be the CEO to do that.
Yes, for sure. And I think that's a mark of a very good employer, at no matter what level, if you can allow your staff to take risks. We have been pushing some boundaries in terms of how we view trust and our relationship to cities and regions and so on. And as we know, back to Ujwal, there's a huge divide in the U.S. in terms of rural, suburban, and urban. So there's a fracturing there. I don't know how that deals with your thinking about the caste, but it's tribal, which is, I think, in your bailiwick of, if you don't agree with me, then you're the wrong tribe, and I will never even accept your facts. So, and Lisa, the trust discussion goes very, very deep. And we need dialogue at I call it the moral and ethical level. And that's really, it never occurs, and it's very hard to do. But when you can build trust in corporations and cities and so on. I just like to leave with one thought. I've been trying to figure out the caste issue for years in the U.S. And I take a look at suburban, rural communities saying, there is absolutely no hope at all that my children will ever get into Juilliard. But they look at people in the cities, and people living in the cities are saying, there is a hope that if I work hard, if my children work hard, they can get into Juilliard. And I found that, to me, kind of the most interesting way of describing some of the thinking that's going on among these people and how they see others.
I think it's a really interesting discussion, and I want to pick up on the trust piece because it's an area that, at Decision Partners, we do a lot of work in understanding people's mental models. And one of the things that we do is deconstruct trust and look at what are the trust factors for different cohorts, different groups of people. And it's not one thing. And I think that we need to get past, and Lisa, you mentioned it, we need to get past the opinion surveys that companies like to use, and trust is a yes or no answer. It's not. Organizations, leaders are trusted for some things, they're not trusted for other things. And teasing out what those factors are and really working with understanding of where are the gaps, what needs to be fixed, what do we need to go to work on is critical. It's critical to, as Dave said, the dialogue. You need to, it's kind of the foundational piece. How do you build trust based on shared understanding? And I think that's what we should be looking at going forward, because trust is foundational. It's how you get people to work together productively, happily, and as Ujwal said, joyfully.
And I would love to pick up on something you said, Sarah, because, one of the things we analyze a lot is the meanings around trust. And one of the things we find is it's a package deal. You can't just build trust by just having great management or a great boss, for example. It also is determined, and if you put this in the context of a large company, it's determined by the practices of that company. For example, employment practices, whether it's paid sick leave time, whether it's benefits, all of that stuff. But it also relates to how the organization sees its role in society. So for example, is the organization actively involved in politics? Is it involved in lobbying? What kinds of issues does it take a stand on? All of this also plays a role in building trust. So you may trust a person you work with, but it still doesn't give you the ability to trust the organization you work for unless all the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. And I think that's the part that we're trying to really bring forward with these senior leaders in these organizations.
We talked in the last episode about skills, and we talked a little bit about, in the past couple of episodes actually, about skill development. And I think, Ujwal, what you just highlighted is a particular skill that leaders need to have at this moment in time. And I think it's because the relationship between organizations and employees is shifting. And as we look at the future, we're not moving on a set path, and organizations are not behaving the way that they used to. And employees are not behaving the way that they used to. And as we get to this stage of unpredictability, it gives us an opportunity to shape what we want for the future, but it requires us to have different types of leadership skills. You mentioned, Ujwal, that it's, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. And one of the analogies that we use in our trust-based leadership work and in all of the work when we're imagining what the future would be is to make sure that everyone's really clear. A puzzle is something where there's a picture on the box, we know what we're building, you put in place the edge pieces first, and then you fill it in with the pieces, and you have all the pieces you need in order to complete the picture. That is not the situation that we are in. Instead, we're leaning on what Sarah referenced earlier, more of the scientific model, which is to say, we're on pursuit of solving a mystery. We have questions of what's going to unfold, and we're trying to solve the mystery, and we're looking for clues along the way. And not every mystery gets wrapped up really neatly, and we may not actually have all of the answers that we need. So the leadership that we have to have has to trust that we're going to be able to do the right things, and our people need to be able to trust that together we're going to continue to solve this mystery without feeling like we have to give what's the picture on the front of the box, then here's the 6 steps of how we're going to get there. That's how we're used to leading. Trust is a very different thing when all of a sudden now we're partners in solving really significant future-focused mysteries.
Well, let's turn the lens around. I want your perspective on this for a minute, Sarah, and I just want to put in this context. Let's just say, take what Lisa just said and turn it around. So we're talking about leadership, but also that informs expectation of leadership. And what Lisa described is uncomfortable generally for me in my expectation of leaders. And we've seen that time and time again over the last 15 months. And I know you've been, you watch what's going on with the public health agencies across the country. at every turn, we wanted an answer. We wanted those leaders to give us the picture on the puzzle box and say what piece goes where. And their answer typically, Sarah, was, we're learning as we go. We have, as a society, pushed back on that sense of leadership.
And it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. Uncertainty is very uncomfortable. But the truth is, the solution is not, it's not a black and white solution. We're in a process now, we've talked about it in previous episodes, where adaptive management is what we're all doing. The Public Health Agency of Canada and the provincial agencies of public health have all been learning. The scientific process has been evolving as we've learned about the pandemic, we've learned about the vaccinations, we've learned how the vaccines work. We continue to learn. So I think that continuous learning's got to be the key skill. We're coming back to our discussion about skills, and we all have to be prepared for this ongoing adaptation. It's a journey. It's not a destination.
I want to pick up on that and go back to what you just positioned in terms of how we've reacted when leadership has been more about the mystery and less about the puzzle box. You're right. We really have railed against it. And because there wasn't a translation down to the individual level of, so what do you want me to do? We tried to solve the problem and continued to ask for more data and information. And we focused on the wrong things. So for example, we focused on, well, what's the date? Tell me the date that the vaccine is going to arrive on our shores. Tell me the date that my small business is going to be able to reopen. And instead of reorienting all of that energy and thinking so that people were focused on, let's leave that as a clue, as part of the mystery. You don't have the answer yet of the date. But if that date were today, what would you do? How would it change your behavior? What do you need to have prepared before the date actually gets here? If we had focused on being recovery ready and being ready in advance of some of these big pieces of data that we thought were this missing puzzle piece, once we know the date, then the whole picture will become clear. We would have been in a much better situation and position. And that's the shift of learning how to navigate mysteries versus waiting to get the piece of the puzzle to put it into the spot and then stand back and say, look, I created the picture.
I totally agree. I think in my world of risk and decision making, there's basically three questions: the what, so what, and now what. And we focus so much on the what, like what's the date? Just tell me the date, then I'll know for sure what we're doing next. But we haven't focused on the variables. We haven't focused on the, so what does that mean? And now what do we need to do today? And now what do we need to do? What do we need to plan for in the future? And I think if we could get people to think more broadly and in terms of our leaders, not focus so much on communicating the absolutes, the what's, but get people thinking about the so what and the now what, we'd be a lot further ahead.
I'm constantly trying to get people to trust that something's going to happen 25 years from now. And that's a hard communications piece. So I share and tell with my spokespeople, politicians, corporate leaders, I said, there are two things you want to get across about trust. First, the public trusts your values. They don't know if you're competent, you quite know what you're going to do, but they do know you're going to make the decision they would, the same way they would, had they been you. The second is they may not know who you are, but they trust your competence. So you could be misanthrope, but they know you're competent to do the right thing. And if you, as a member of the public, had that information, they would make the same decision based on that information that you would. So that's constantly what we're trying to promote to our leaders who are trying to get something done that's only going to happen 25 years from now.
Ujwal, let me just ask you, can we just go back to the opening point that you made about the caste system in the U.S.? And based on what we're just hearing here, vis-a-vis, this shift in focus of expectation of leadership and the tasks that we require of leadership. I think that what I'm hearing for effective leadership, particularly in a place like the United States where we have these great divides and they're so deep, that the leadership has to be very transparent about its process. Get down to Sarah's 3 questions in order to not lead people, but to better understand what's at the heart of why they're responding in a certain way to a certain leadership initiative.
Yeah, I mean, we always bring everything back to meaning, and when we talk about how to be a leader and build cohesion and build trust with the employee base, with the marketplace, with consumers, we always come back to identifying what all of that means to people. And we started this episode talking about the social contract, and when we look at one of the reasons why we ask what does it mean is because what we find is what is the dominant mental model in the mind of the human being, in the mind of the American consumer, the American citizen, when it comes to the social contract. And what we realize is it's not everything. And what I'm getting at, Dave, is that yes, it's about transparency, but it's not about transparency on every issue. It's about transparency on the issues that really matter, on the issues that give meaning to what the social contract really is and how it can be improved. Overall, one of the things that we've been going around telling everybody is that the social contract is fundamentally broken, and that there are 4 major issues: workers' rights, and that's what pertains to the caste system in particular and the recognition of that. There's a lack of representation, there's wealth inequality, and in particular, there's broken social cohesion. There are 65 million American consumers today, American people, that believe that social cohesion is fundamentally broken in the country. So if you're a leader and you're thinking about how to solve these problems, what we're urging them to do is to focus on what is dominant in the mental model, in the mental picture of the consumer, of the citizen, because that's how you make impact. If you give them, if you're transparent on anything or everything, if you take a rational approach, like the example we were talking about with everybody focusing on the date when something changes or when the vaccine is available and whatnot, if you take that approach, you're going to fail right off the bat, because you're just not speaking the same innate language of meaning that the consumer, that the citizen, the human being wants you to speak.
So Lisa, I want you to lead us into the next episode, because based on that sort of torqued thinking, and we've talked a lot about sort of misconceptions, particularly in relation to our leadership, our careers, and our skills. I think at one point you mentioned that we are living longer and we're working longer and our careers are extending. And I'd be curious to know your own sense of where that's going, because if, 25 years ago, 65-year-old would have been would have retired maybe even earlier. Now it's not unusual for folks to extend their careers into their 70s. And we have to kind of shift our brains around that as employers and employees, I would think.
I think it's a fundamental extension of this discussion of the social contract, because it is all shifting and changing. And what I'm really looking forward to getting into in our next discussion is how so much of the way we think about these things is based on a foundation of outdated career thinking. And so the way we think about our own careers is actually limiting how we think about these changes in the social contract. And what possibilities are there if we were to actually catch up to our own longevity and think about our careers in a way that's relevant for 2021, not for 1963. So that's the discussion that I can't wait to get into next time.
When I listened to this, we started talking about that social contract. And I love that, Ujwal brought up the American caste system. And I thought, wow, okay, that really says a lot. That we need to be taken out of our comfort zone first and acknowledge that there is a caste system. And I don't think this is specific to the United States. It happens in varying degrees in countries around the world. But the idea that we all are in a place where we look at people who live in our own community as other is a bit of a challenge to start with. But when we get into leadership, what's clear based on this conversation is that we as individuals have a responsibility to take a leadership role. And the hardest part of that is going to be to acknowledge someone else's challenges. Why is it that they feel the way they do? Don't tell them that they shouldn't feel like that. And you know what, Aaron, we're heading into a political cycle again here in Canada. I guarantee you that is going to be the language where they feel like this. You shouldn't feel the way they feel. You should feel the way I feel. And that's going to be the political narrative, no matter what political stripe. It's completely contrary to the model of leadership we just heard expressed in this episode.
Yes. And for me, what stood out the most is really this theme that has been reinforced as we've gone through these conversations, is that the problem that really has been highlighted is in every facet, we have siloed our decision making. And the pandemic forced us to admit that. We have been thinking about people and solutions in little boxes and not, I hate to use this phrase, holistically, but not holistically. We have been looking at people who are 65 plus as unemployable. Not true. The pandemic proved that is not true. We have been looking at people who are living in long-term care as a segment of society that just, needs help and needs to convalesce. Not true. They need a different system. We saw the way that kind of thinking played out in real time as the pandemic took hold. We have been thinking about our young people as people who just need to check boxes in terms of their education. Not true. What we've seen throughout these conversations is that our young people are the ones who are going to challenge the norms, and we need to start creating systems that allow them to do that in a way that's, going to uplift them and allow us all to follow their lead. So I think what we're really getting to now is a conversation about, let's bring it back down to ground level. What does this mean for our workforce? If our population is aging, if we've learned anything from the pandemic, how do we start to break these molds in a way that allows us to leverage the true creativity and innovation that is within our population already and get rid of some of these barriers that we had put up for no reason?
It can't be institutional, though. This is really now, we got back to that social contract. It's my contract. It's your contract. This is an individual effort that each of us has to be aware of and make. And I'm not telling you it's going to be easy. Taking us out of the comfort zone, that might be the hardest thing that we all have to deal with over the next 10 years to make sure that we make the next normal a better normal.
The Next Normal is sponsored by Challenge Factory, shaping the future of work.
By Decision Partners. Our world is a better place when we make better decisions.
By MotivBase, decoding implicit meaning behind what people talk about.
And by Hardy Stevenson and Associates, planning the cities of the future.
Comments, questions, or ideas for our hosts? Feel free to drop us an email at hello@storystudionetwork.com.
This series is produced for the Story Studio Network by Eye Contact Productions.